Thank you so much for joining us for the reboot of the PNAMP Remote Sensing Forum. If we haven't met, my name is Amy Pold, and I work for the USGS, where all of my time is dedicated to the Pacific Northwest Aquatic Monitoring Partnership, or PNAMP for short. And I have to confess that I actually don't know a lot about remote sensing, so I am looking forward to learning more. My expertise is in organizing and facilitating meetings, but don't worry. I have Lauren Burns from CritFic as my co-lead for the forum, as well as 5 others serving on what we're calling the organizing committee. And you'll get to meet all of them in just a bit. So here is today's agenda. After I wrap up the welcome, we'll spend just a little bit of time getting to know you all with a few live polls. And then I'm going to pass it over to Lauren, and she's going to cover our vision for the forum. We'll meet the rest of the organizing committee. We'll ask for your feedback on topics that you're most interested in for this first year of the forum. And we'll end by opening it up for questions, comments, and discussion. All right, but first, we have a couple of tips on navigating the Teams meeting platform. So if you're not used to using Teams, we ask that you please make sure you're muted when you're not speaking. If you are using your computer audio, you can do that using the microphone icon on the toolbar. And Microsoft is constantly rolling out changes to Teams, so your toolbar might look slightly different than what I'm showing on the screen. But depending on whether you're using the browser or the desktop, that toolbar could be at the top right, like fixed to the top right of your meeting window, or you might need to hover your mouse to get that appear near the bottom middle. If you are on your phone, most people are on smartphones, so you can mute and unmute yourself using your smartphone, but you can also use *6. And if we are forced to mute you for being noisy, if you end up wanting to talk at the end during the open discussion, you will have to unmute yourself on your phone and hit *6 to be able to talk again. So just don't panic if it sounds like nobody's responding to you. Try that *6 tip if you're on the phone. All right. As we go along, if questions come to mind, you should feel free to put those in the chat, and we're going to circle back to those during the Q&A. And then if you have trouble at any time, if you're having difficulties with the meeting platform, assuming you can get to the chat, you can post issues that you're having there, and we'll do our best to help you out. All right, so now we want to get to know you a little bit better. So for us as facilitators, I think, and also for you as participants, it's nice to know who's on today's call. And because we have a relatively large group, it's going to take too long for everybody to introduce themselves out loud. So instead, we're going to ask that you take 30 seconds to open the chat. So figure out how to do that and introduce yourself there with your name, affiliation, and your role. I'm gonna do that as well. I'm gonna take a second and introduce myself in the chat. We've got success. I'm seeing people introducing themselves. All right, and some familiar names for sure, some old friends. All right, so that's great. Thank you so much for that. I think up next, we're gonna continue this thread of getting to know one another. And we're going to ask you 2 questions using Mentimeter, which is a live polling service. And you can get to the poll in 2 different ways. So you can either use the link in the chat. I'm going to put it there now. All right, so I've got that link in the chat. And if you don't see it at the bottom, it might be up just 1 or 2 because people are still introducing themselves. And then the other option is to use your phone's camera to scan the QR code. And I guess I should point out that you shouldn't actually take a picture. You should just use the camera to scan the code, and then a link should pop up, and then you can tap on that. So you've got 2 options to get to that poll, and I'm gonna leave the QR code up for just another little bit for those of you that want to try that option. All right, wow. So we still have some votes rolling in. This is great. I'm surprised that Idaho, only one person sitting in Idaho today. I thought there'd be a little bit more representation from Idaho, but that's okay. We've got some work to do. We'll try to put our feelers out to Idaho, get them more involved. I am excited to see we've got some folks from outside, you know, what I consider kind of the 3 central states for the Pacific Northwest. I mean, if you are one of those 5 people in that other category and you want, you can throw your location in the chat. You don't have to, though. That would just be for fun. All right. So I think that's pretty much winding down. I think we've got everyone who wants to vote has probably voted. All right. So we have been calling this the Remote Sensing Forum Reboot because PNAMP had a remote sensing forum from 2005 to 2013. And they were a pretty active group. They hosted workshops and webinars, and you can still find several of their products on the PNAMP website. But for various reasons, the group sort of lost momentum and stopped meeting. But over the last decade, the use of remote sensing technologies for aquatic ecosystem applications has really skyrocketed. And especially the use, I think, of UAVs or drones. And so I think most, or some of you at least, are aware that PNAMP recently hosted the Emerging Technologies Information Sessions webinar series. And if you did miss them, those webinars were all recorded and you can find them on PNAMP's YouTube channel. But back in October, during the second ETIS webinar, Lauren gave this great talk about the use of UAVs for large-scale habitat monitoring in the Columbia River Basin. And during her talk, she used a Mentimeter poll to see if folks would be interested in participating in a work group to develop common UAV standards and best practices for the Pacific Northwest. And, you know, very few people said no. Most said yes, or possibly in the future. And that really got me thinking that maybe this was something that PNAMP could help with. So after several conversations between Lauren and I, and conferring with our supervisors, we had a small scoping meeting to assess if this was like resonating with others. And ultimately, we got approval from the PNAMP Steering Committee. We decided to reboot the Remote Sensing Forum. So that's what got us here today. Thank you so much again for joining us. And I'm going to pass it over to Lauren to talk about our vision for the Remote Sensing Forum.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm just going to bring up my slides quickly. Those displaying well, Amy?
Yep, I can see them and I hear you loud and clear.
Alrighty. Well, I just want to start by thanking everyone that hopped on the call today. Means a lot. This has been an ongoing effort for me over the last couple of years, and I'm really happy to collaborate with PNAMP on getting this forum restarted. So Remote Sensing Forum Reboot, what's the purpose? So we're really addressing a current and ongoing need, as I mentioned. The Pacific Northwest, as well as, you know, everywhere, is getting very data rich. So there's a ongoing effort. You can see on the left these figures that I pulled from Becca Scully, who is also a USGS/PNAMP employee. She gave a presentation in 2020 at Oregon AFS, and it has also been developing this data visualization tool on the PNAMP website. So there's been an ongoing effort to relate monitoring methods and metrics from historic ground-based surveys. However, the metadata standards, data storage, and standardization of these remote sensing data products are still quite new. So despite the growing application of remote sensing within the basin, few of these data are shared, mainly because there's no data portal similar to what I'm displaying here on the left, and little conversation that's taking place. So the solution that we've come up with is to revive this remote sensing forum or a remote sensing science work group, because there will be a collaborative work group component. So redefine the forum. The vision or the purpose of the forum is the Pacific Northwest Aquatic Monitoring Partnership acknowledges that there is a need within the Pacific Northwest to create a focused environment, which is a forum, for the open discussion and sharing of learned experiences and methodologies as they relate to the rapidly evolving field of remote sensing. The forum was developed to address this need while providing equitable opportunities for individuals and entities that would advance the use of remote sensing technologies and data for the research, management, and aquatic ecosystems. So as the forum currently stands, we have three main goals, and one is relating back to this equitable opportunities. We really want to make sure that regardless of your stage in your career, you're able to join this forum as a means for professional development or advancement of programmatic needs as it relates to remote sensing in the fields of fisheries and water resources in the Pacific Northwest. We want to help facilitate and increase the collaboration and hopefully create a regionally specific standardized method for collecting and analyzing a variety of remotely sensed data. And thirdly, we also want to reduce the barrier or entry of adoption to implementing remote sensing practices by providing technical expertise and feedback in an online forum setting. I'm sure there's many in the audience today that can relate to what is banging your head against your computer screen, scouring through online forums, trying to figure out methods that previous, non-technical or recreational users have been using when flying drones, analyzing data. It's kind of a rabbit hole, and we really wanted to synthesize a forum that could provide a more technical, specific knowledge base for the Pacific Northwest. So in revisioning the forum, we thought that we should have an organizing committee. So the organizing committee is currently made up of 7 members, including myself and Amy Poles, which are co-facilitators. And like we mentioned in our goals, we wanted to represent, a range of career professionals that have a technical expertise in one remote sensing topic and cover the breadth of the Columbia River Basin. So you can see that that spans from Idaho, Richie, all alone in Idaho, over to the Columbia River estuary, where we have Narayan and Elasmar. So just briefly, I think we do have a little bit of time to introduce you to our current organizing member committee. And I will say that if you yourself, or if you know of anyone that would be interested in joining the organizing committee, please send that contact information to Amy Poles or myself, and we can get that conversation started and outline better what the duties of an organizing committee member are. So I'm just going to start, and then I'll pass. Hopefully we have most of our organizing committee members on the call. So I'll start, and then I'm going to pass it to Jane if you're on the call. So my name is Lauren Burns. I'm a fishery biologist with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. I have an interest in remote sensing, obviously, and as Amy mentioned, gave her presentation at the ETIS seminar back in October. CritFic has been growing our drone monitoring program and creating a protocol that we're calling the Tributary Habitat Monitoring Protocol, which details a method for collecting ground-based and aerial-based fish habitat data. And we've tested these methods out in the Grand Ronde. So my expertise is mainly surrounding drones, photogrammetry, or structure from motion. And Jane, are you on the call?
Hi, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Atha, and I'm with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I am a geomorphologist who has been using remote sensing techniques and analyses for the duration of my career in Washington and beyond. Most recently, I have been using UAS to monitor restoration and habitat projects statewide here and there. And again, as has been mentioned by Amy and others, that I continue to bump into new projects that need new methods and still trying to figure out how to standardize and kind of streamline our protocols. Since the technology, my partner in crime flying drones, Hannah Faulkner, and I were the first to obtain a drone for our agency, and now the interest continues to grow. And so certainly this forum is, for me, going to be a great place to advance some of these standardizations and forums and professional development as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy, or thanks, Jane. Sorry about that. And Richie.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to thank Lauren and Amy for putting this on. Really appreciate getting everyone together. I'm really excited about this forum. A little bit about me. I work for Biomark. I'm based in Boise, Idaho. Most of the remote sensing work that I do revolves around fisheries, so primarily utilizing remote sensing techniques for recovery of salmon and steelhead in the upper salmon, but also kind of spanning throughout the Columbia Basin. I've worked with UAV, UAS, imagery, LIDAR, bathymetric LIDAR, all sorts of aquatic habitat modeling, sensor tags. So I'm just really excited to hear from the group and looking forward to the forum and happy to be here.
Thanks, Richie. Narayan, are you on the call?
I am. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can, with the seagulls in the background. Narayan's out in the field right now.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't be on the video chat, but like Lauren said, I'm out on the Columbia River. Thank you, Amy and Lauren, for rebooting. I am also very excited. Like Lauren mentioned, I am based in Astoria, Oregon. I work for CREST, which stands for Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force. I've been in marine fisheries and fisheries for about 12 years now, with CREST for 7, and I do the monitoring for all our restoration projects in the lower Columbia River. And about 4 years ago, I got my hands on my first UAV, UAS drone. So I implemented our drone operations at CREST, and we used the technology to build orthomosaic maps of our sites for pre and post restoration monitoring, as well as design for pre. So we provide the maps to engineers, and engineers will then use the map and the topographic layer that we put on the maps to design the projects, and also for adaptive management after the project has been implemented. And then I also just use it for photo points and other monitoring metrics. And most recently, you know, all our funders, they like to go on site visits, but no site visits these days. So for promotional pretty pictures and videos, I've been using it a lot for that actually lately. And as Jane mentioned, I'm very interested in a standardized approach to the drone technology and how we use it in monitoring. So that's why I'm really excited to be part of the organizing committee, and just excited that there is interest in this forum for these purposes. Thanks, everyone. That's it for me.
Thanks, Narayan. And Amy already introduced herself, so we're going to skip you, Amy, sorry. And Connor, are you on the call?
I am. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So my name is Connor Stone. I work for the Grand Ronde Model Watershed, which is based out of the Grand Ronde Basin in northeastern Oregon. We've done a lot of work with drones in the last several years. In fact, it is my predecessor is kind of the person who started our little drone program, and I took over after he left for Washington. So it's been a pretty big part of my job, but I am also the IT manager, website manager, database manager. I wear a lot of hats here at the Model Watershed. What we've been mostly using drones for in the last few years has been getting a lot of imagery from a lot of our projects, from both a pre-project and post-project standpoint, to make comparisons, and also for the purposes of plannings and designs very similar to what Narayan was using those layers for. But we are also trying to push forward. We're trying to break into some new technology here. We've just obtained this last year, actually, a multispectral drone, which has 6 different sensors, dedicated red, green, and blue sensors on it, as well as near and infrared. So we'll be leveraging a lot of that data to hopefully create some more interesting topographic maps and some more interesting layers that we can hopefully leverage for metrics for our monitoring program. So that's kind of where we're at. I've done a little bit of work with FLIR in the past. Unfortunately, not too much avail. In my opinion, the hardware just isn't quite there yet. But I'm watching and I'm waiting for some kind of a breakthrough in that regard. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey so far. I see a few people here in the call that I recognize by name. We're funded primarily by BPA, but we have other funding sources as well through places like OWEB. And I know both Sean Welch and Lauren Burns pretty well through kind of month-to-month conversations, et cetera. So anyways, I think that's pretty much it for me. If anyone has any questions later, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, Connor. And Sean, I saw you on the call, so you're up.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Lauren?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for Amy and Lauren pulling this together. And thanks for all the attendees for turning out this afternoon. I really appreciate the participation and getting some momentum and energy behind this group. I'm Sean Welch. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Oregon. I'm currently the tributary habitat policy lead for Bonneville's Fish and Wildlife Program, and have tributary habitat policy responsibility pretty much through the anadromous and non-anadromous zones from western Montana to Bonneville Dam. And so with that, I oversee implementation of the Fish and Wildlife Program and make sure that we're meeting our statutory and regulatory obligations under ESA and the Northwest Power Act, and our trust responsibilities to First Nations as a federal agency. I think what I'm most interested in is obviously the technical components of remote sensing and how to improve the execution of stream restoration, watershed restoration, planning and implementation, but also assessment. And my background's in hydraulic engineering, restoration design, watershed analysis, hydrology, geomorphology. And so even though I don't get to do a lot of technical work anymore, I'm really excited about, the new burgeoning techniques of remote sensing and how they apply to those different areas of improving landscapes and watershed conditions, fish habitat conditions, etc. And so I guess where I'm really excited about this as well is thinking about how the applications of this new technology across planning and implementation can help inform Bonneville policy, and how we think about the implementation of our tributary habitat program by utilizing new and innovative technology to be more efficient and more effective at restoring our landscapes. So, thank you.
Really great. Just want to thank the organizing committee members again. It's great to have full attendance and to give, anyone that's interested in the remote sensing forum a little bit of background as to your expertise. So thank you again. All right. So a little bit into the format for what we have in mind for the remote sensing forum. So we're envisioning that we'll hold webinars and workshops. All of these will be virtual for the time being. We're thinking 4 times a year for the first year, and then we'll reevaluate thereafter. We'll invite guest speakers to provide information outside of our personal expertise, and we're planning to wait to host workshops until 2021 to give us some time to ramp up and really understand the needs of the forum members. Despite Teams' crash yesterday, we're planning to host the forum through Microsoft Teams initially. So if you haven't used Teams, there will be a team page where members can directly communicate in a forum and a message board. You can solicit advice and provide experience based on your own knowledge, based on your own history with using any remote sensing topic. And we'll also be using Teams as a location to store files, frequently asked questions, any documents that might come from the Remote Sensing Forum or organizing committee. We also envision that sub-working groups could be a great component of the forum. We envision that we would break these up by expertise or task. So there could be a LIDAR subgroup, there could be a UAS subgroup, there could be any number of remote sensing option subgroups. And what we'd like to do is really develop time to creating open source code and reference manuals using a platform such as GitHub, where this work can be referenced by others and used directly as a cost and time saving method. We also envision that there could be some live application testing or workshops that happen to develop methods, field-based methods or analytical-based methods. And the role of the organizing committee members in the forum will primarily be to help moderate and answer directed questions when it comes to their particular expertise. We're hoping that the forum is able to exist on its own without much input from the organizing committee members, but feel free to ask directed questions if you're really struggling to identify the information that you need. And as I mentioned, we're also hoping to develop frequently asked questions, not only as a means to not let the forum get bogged down and have it difficult to find the information that you actually need embedded in a long list, but as a reference manual that new users that sign up for the forum can find easily. And I did forget to mention, there will be a listserv. So right now we've just been using a previous email list from the attendees for the ETIS, the PNAMP ETIS webinars. We invite you to sign up for a listserv that's posted through USGS after the meeting to ensure that you continue to get emails and reminders about upcoming meetings. So now that I've told you a little bit about the forum structure and the vision, what is remote sensing anyway? So without going into too much detail, because that's what future remote sensing forum meetings will involve, remote sensing is the measurement of a quantity associated with an object by a device that it's not in direct contact with. And this usually involves a lot of rapidly evolving technology, such as these platform mounted sensors that you see in the pictures on the right. So shout out to James Diedrich, I see you on the call. James helped develop this drone boat, which was tested in the Grand Ronde a year or two ago, I can't remember. Just below that, we have a Regal LIDAR sensor mounted on a drone. There's also airborne capabilities where platforms are mounted on small aircrafts, like you see in the right panel. So that would be something similar to the contract work that you could do with quantum spatial, doing hyperspectral or LIDAR acquisition. And then finally, terrestrial laser scanning, which you see mounted on top of a tripod in the bottom left figure. And of course, the platform that you decide to use depends on the application and your desired coverage and spatial resolution. So just to dive a little bit more into that, so we have a landscape. As I was saying, your spatial resolution and extent are one consideration that you should take into mind when choosing the data source. Also the accuracy, the desired accuracy of the data, and the distance above ground level, which will influence the accuracy and the extent. So first we have, as an example, I'm gonna give examples of 4 different types of remote sensing data structure. So you have satellite imagery, which is, collected the highest above ground level with a set spatial extent and can be as low as 0.15 meter accuracy. That could be something like There's a number of LIDAR sensors that are now mounted on satellites from space. So next up, as I mentioned, would be something mounted on a small plane, lower distance from the ground. You can get an even finer accuracy in most cases, but notice on the image to the left, the area covered is much less. And finally, a drone, or something like a drone, a smaller unmanned aircraft that's collecting data, sometimes at a finer spatial scale, depending on the data type, really close to the ground, and takes the most effort and time, well, not the most effort, but takes the most out of the previous methods listed to cover a given spatial extent. And finally would be collecting ground surveys. So these are the types of data that we've are frequently associated with something like the Columbia Habitat Monitoring Program, or a terrestrial laser scanner, where a ground crew is collecting data in a slower fashion on the ground, covering the least area of all of these methods. So I mentioned in the vision for this remote sensing forum that we're focusing on aquatic ecosystems. And that's mainly because most of the work that's being done in the Pacific Northwest is focused on salmon. So these ecosystems could be freshwater, brackish, estuary, and marshes. And throughout the Pacific Northwest, one of the issues that we'll have to talk about when developing any sort of standardized protocol is the diversity of challenges that are posed with any number of methods throughout the region. So these could be challenges related to vegetation changes as you move from the west side, where streams are almost fully shaded, to the east side, where it's more desert, dry, fewer vegetation, and different types of vegetation. You have elevation and access issues. So accessing a site, hauling in a drone, or backpacking in a drone, and also accessing remote or private lands often requires permits and advance notice. So within the field of aquatic resources or fisheries, there's a diversity of remote sensing applications. And in this presentation, I will give a brief overview of just a few applications that others that have presented at the ETIS seminars and beyond are applying in the basin. And as our organizing committee members noted already, a lot of these are listed here on the left. So these could be restoration planning, design, and effectiveness or impact assessment, assessing changing climatic conditions, assessing land cover via mapping and change detection, assessing ecological condition or vegetation health, or more simply, collecting imagery to communicate with stakeholders. And on the right, you can see that I've borrowed a figure from Phil Roney, who also gave a presentation at the ETIS seminar, which kind of breaks down a hypothesized grouping of which remote sensing technology can do what. And you can see that LIDAR green, or bathymetric LIDAR, being one of the most valuable remote sensing methods to provide relevant fisheries and habitat information. I do want to note that regardless of the remote sensing application used, ground-based measurements are still needed for validation of these remote sensing methods. So stepping into a few use cases, I'm going to cover some of the more common use cases in the Pacific Northwest, the first being unmanned aerial systems, or commonly referred to as drones. So with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, we conducted a study in 2018, which I presented on a number of times. But one of the products that came, or one of the interesting findings that came out of the study, was our ability to characterize river bathymetry from structure for motion. So we tested a method that James Dietrich has published, and I'm plotting those data here along this longitudinal profile And you can note that there are 3 lines, one representing the true ground measurements that we collected with the total station that you can see in the orange line corresponding to the deepest part of the stream, so thaw-wake points, which are the yellow dots. And then the other 2 lines are these corrected data from an unmanned aerial vehicle or a drone, and the uncorrected data. So you can see in this example that we get very close to the true bathymetry that was collected on the ground using James Dietrich's structure from motion correction algorithm, compared to when not accounting for these, the refraction of light through air and water. Another use case, I'm going to call out Richie on this one. This is a figure borrowed from his presentation from an ETIS seminar. The folks at Biomark have been expanding beyond just the classification and quantification of in-stream habitat, like I showed in the previous slide, to building a capacity model using a quantile random forest. Their plans include going beyond finer spatial resolutions as reach and segment scale, as you see in the first 2 pictures, to entire watershed scale extrapolation using satellite imagery. As I mentioned, LIDAR data is very valuable, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is both in the processing time and expertise, and also the cost for acquisition. So you're able to cover large swaths of land, get a tremendous amount of data, but it takes special expertise to be able to work with that. So Richie, I'm really glad you're our technical expert for LIDAR on the committee. So I'm just going to call out the recent LIDAR acquisition that happened in the Grand Ronde. So in 2020, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, CRITFIC, contracted with Quantum Spatial to do a return flight, this time collecting green topobathymetric LIDAR in the Grand Ronde. You can see the acquisition dates and the coverage areas for these acquisitions in the Grand Ronde via the different colors. We initially had topo LIDAR, terrestrial LIDAR collected in 2009. So this is a return flight over 10 years later. The large spatial coverage and fine resolution, as I mentioned, also mean lots of data. So on the left here, you can see these figures are courtesy of Sean Welch, as he was also diving into the raw LAS files. You can see the last point cloud with a general classification of water, ground, or bare earth, and vegetation. And you can notice that on the right, there's a wood jam, which is hard to piece out from these, from the point cloud seen in the left figure. So because these data are numerous, because the point cloud is so large, it requires a special expertise to be able to pull out these data. And further, it requires that there's a standardization of how we go about classifying point clouds. Another application, which could be derived from both LIDAR, structure from motion data, or ground-based topographic surveys, are change detection. So in this figure, borrowed from Kramer et al., you can see geomorphic units classified using the geomorphic unit assessment tool developed by Joe Wheaton and folks in Utah. So up in the top left corner, you can see a pre-project file and a post-project file, along with longitudinal profiles and the types and extent of each of the geomorphic units. Again, this is a product that relevant to the Grand Ronde project that we plan on having quantum spatial run to classify geomorphic units based on topobathymetric LIDAR across a more continuous, larger coverage area. Another use case scenario is vegetation mapping. So this slide was borrowed from Amy Bordy, and you can see In this study that they did in 2017, they used a drone to collect hyperspectral data. They classified a number of different wetland vegetation types according to their spectral signature, and used that information in an object-based image analysis to characterize vegetation for tidal wetlands. Another use case that was identified in a pre-survey that we sent out before this meeting was red identification. So in a study done on the American River by Harrison et al., they used hyperspectral imagery to classify and detect reds. So in the pictures on the left, you can clearly see 2 spawning salmon in a cleared gravel bed. And in the figure just above that, it's a little bit harder to see, but they've denoted the areas of additional reds that they found just from observation in the image. So this method, as I mentioned, used drone-derived hyperspectral imagery in combination with just regular red, green, blue imagery and spectral band combinations to create depth profiles and in combination with chlorophyll to classify reds from aerial imagery. So these are just a few use case scenarios of remote sensing topics that we could focus on upcoming forum meetings. Like I mentioned, we sent out a poll before the meeting to get some opinions from users in the basin about topics that we should prioritize. So we asked the question, what topics would be most beneficial for a remote sensing forum to address in the future? These could include application-based, analysis-based, or interpretation of remote sensing methodologies and data products in the context of aquatic ecosystems. So we got a number of responses. I tried my best to summarize them or bin them together. So the first being automated feature extraction and classification, accepted standards for post-processing, working with large data sets, including cloud storage and computing, obtaining relevant and reliable data products, with the example being metrics for fish habitat. So next, we want to ensure that this forum serves the users, which are you, the persons that are interested in data collection, analysis, interpretation. So in order to tailor the forum meeting topics to those that are timely and relevant to your work, we want to further ask for your feedback on prioritizing these summarized responses. And we're going to do that now in another Menti poll. So you can either go to the link that Amy just dropped in the chat or use your phone to scan the QR code. Lots of people interested in machine learning, object-based image analysis, feature extraction. And I do want to note that Amy and I are going to be, after the meeting, sending out a post-meeting email. We'll include the link to this pre-meeting survey. So for those that didn't have a chance to vote, you can still put your input in. And the plan is to reevaluate this question during future meetings. So we'll continue to take in new advice or new topics over time as we gain more steam. Okay, well, yeah, so automated feature extraction. I mean, that's a hot topic, so I'm looking forward to potentially getting a guest speaker in. Let me go back to my presentation. That can give some expertise on that topic. I know there's a couple folks at Biomark that we could invite in for that. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A session of the meeting. So just a reminder, and a reminder for me too, that there might be some questions already in the chat box that we're going to address first. If you don't want to raise your hand, feel free to type your question into the chat box and we'll get to it. Or you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak and have audio capabilities. So
Yeah, so this is Amy. And I was just going to add that, yeah, if you have questions or comments about anything we covered, if you want to share what you're hoping to get out of the Remote Sensing Forum, or if you have ideas for upcoming meetings, we want to hear from you. So as Lauren just said, you can type them or you can raise your hand. And Lauren, I did see one question come in earlier. It's kind of a lengthy chat, so I don't want to torture you all with me trying to read it, but I think kind of the beginning part could be summarized as he's cautioning us about standardizing methods, and kind of ends with, I recommend allowing your own agencies and working groups to have some flexibility beyond standards to use new tools as they become available. At least the data collected be substandard to what they could be or used over a much smaller area than they could be. Perhaps a goal should be a process for which new tools and techniques are evaluated and incorporated into practice. So I don't know if you or anybody else, the organizing committee, wants to weigh in on that, or are you looking for some clarification? I think that was, if I go back to the chat.
Was this, do you know who, was that from Mark Fonstad?
It was.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll just quickly address that, and other organizing committee members, if you want to chime in, that would be great. I envision that could be really useful further down the line. I don't know if that's something that we can tackle in this first year of the Remote Sensing Forum, but I think if there's a broad enough interest and we really gain momentum, it could be something that we look for outside funding to purchase additional technologies outside of the budget constraints of our own individual agencies, and perform some testing, or even, renting out different remote sensing applications for testing. Does anyone else on the organizing committee want to chime in on that?
Lauren, this is Sean. I looked at Dr. Fonstad's comments there, in part in particular, lest the data collected be substandard to what they could be used for over a much smaller area than they could be. So I think that's the big thing with particularly like large programs, is to have, if there is some level of standardization or expectation in terms of the process and then the completed product, such that different data sets can be kind of co-complementary from different regions or at different scales or locations across, a large area like the Columbia River Basin. So I totally agree that leave, the creative latitude to individual agencies. For instance, like CritFix monitoring is different than, say, biomarks, but if there are some general standardizations where those data sets could be competently used from an analyst looking at broad spatial scales, I think some level of standardization would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great response, Sean. Thank you.
Hey, Lauren, this is Jen Bayer.
Hey,
I'm going to jump in and just remind folks that PNAMP, our core mission is to facilitate collaboration, and that's really what we're here to do. And there won't be any you must do this standardized protocol ever, right? That's not what PNAMP does. But what we want to do is learn from everyone who's interested in a given topic. Remote sensing today could be fish monitoring analysis another day, and have the group come to consensus or recommendations, and then each entity adopt that information and guidance as they see fit, right? So the strength is in the consensus and the opportunity to work together, but we're definitely not here to say you must do this or you must purchase that other, So just, I guess I'm the small font at the bottom of the page from the lawyer, whatever. Just throw that out there. But we really want people to participate and share and learn from each other so that we can move towards standardized approaches and things, because then there's a lot of strength in that, of course. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Connor, I saw your hand was raised. Do you still have a comment?
Oh, I think it got pretty well covered by the other members, but yeah, I guess just to kind of echo what they were saying, I think the purpose of a forum is to share information and knowledge, and in that respect, I think that even if we don't necessarily standardize anything, I think that what we'll find is people will generally, because we're sharing information on what works and what doesn't, I think that the standardization will come as people gravitate towards what ideas work. I don't think it's going to be something that, anyone says, oh, this is the way that it has to be, and so we're going to make this rigorous structure around, this particular way of doing things. I think it'll probably be more along the lines of, oh, this works, so a lot of people will gravitate towards doing something that way, and then you'll see that standardization kind of evolve out of that. But in the same sense, yeah, I'm totally with everyone else who's echoed that, there needs to be an air of creativity here, because that's how innovation happens, right? That's how we create, new ways and methods for solving these problems. So that was just basically what I wanted to echo with the last two sentiments.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so that was the only question in the chat. If anybody has additional questions, feel free to drop them in, like we said. So I just want to, before we transition into additional conversation, if there's anybody that needs to drop off the call early, I just want to thank you and say, look for an upcoming save the date about the next forum meeting. We're planning to have that before the summer field season, since a lot of us do data collection during the summertime. So that should be late May or early June, hopefully on image classification. And we will send out a save the date. And please reach out to myself or Amy for more information about the Remote Sensing Forum. And thank you. We have a couple conversation topics for those of you that want to stay on. The Remote Sensing Forum Organizing Committee will be doing sort of a roundtable discussion about some emerging issues that will be up for discussion and will be targeted during the forum or within the forum. So let me go back 1 second. So a couple of potential discussion topics. So we've been talking about this this issue of standardization of post-processing methods. And this is going back to Mark Fonsted's question, and some of the things that I presented, the challenges for collecting remotely sensed data. Does anyone envision that we could create a flexible enough monitoring approach that could be tailored to the numerous remote sensing barriers throughout the Pacific Northwest? So these being vegetation, topography, water depth, multi-threaded or braided channels, such as those that you see in stage 0 restoration. And what would that look like? Would that be a flexible approach in terms of a pick list, picking the type of data collection effort that you use, whether that be topography LIDAR, specifically drones, flexibility in the sensors? And if nobody wants to chime in, I can keep talking about this a little bit longer. This is a topic that we at CritVic have. Somebody has their hand up. Matthew Schwartz, go ahead.
Hi, excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I think instead of, you guys were talking about standardization of protocols, which is good to think about down the road. But I think the near term question is, how do you move the metadata around with these remote sensed images? Like, how are you planning on classifying how accurate to ground these images are? So, I mean, as you're building these libraries, people are going to start grabbing these things and want to use them for modeling and different purposes. But I guess what's your plan for, or maybe at some point you'll want to talk about the metadata and accuracy related to these mappings.
Yeah, exactly. And I envision that a lot of, this early remote sensing data that just more general users, those of us that are still getting familiarized with collecting data with a drone, a lot of that data, even though it's useful as imagery and for other types of post-processing, I guess there's a couple other methods in data analysis that's needed, that'll be needed to be done to really tie it to the ground. So whether or not that's permanent structures, doing some additional work, but we want to make sure that as much of those data are saved as possible and continue to be used. So I don't know, Connor or Sean. You both have.
You can go ahead, Sean.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's a little derivative. You had a lot of things in your conversation topic there, Lauren, but one thing I see is just traveling throughout the basin, there's so many folks using, SUAS applications now for anything from bread surveys to habitat characterization to as-built verification and construction. And one of the things, like just kind of on this, maybe not so much the standardization of data like we were talking, or approach like we were talking with Dr. Fonstad, but knowing where those flights are occurring and did they follow some level of standard in terms of overlap and elevation, and then just knowing where that data is. Like, it's like I tell our sponsors, like, save the pictures. Like, don't just run your orthomosaic, your DSM, and then delete all the pictures, because those pictures are going to be gold, as we see different distributions of SFM-oriented flights throughout the basin. So one thing is, it's like just knowing where data is being collected. Is it kind of following some standard for SUAS data collection? And then folks having an ability to know where some of that information's been collected over time. So if folks are doing regional analysis, they would know who to contact or where to contact to get those images so they could do their own processing. So one little twist on the question there, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And Connor?
Yeah, just again to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Sean was saying. I mean, I think that a lot of it depends on the type of data that you're collecting and for what purpose. When we're out in the field and we're collecting lots of imagery, I mean, when we first started out, at least, it was a lot about just getting a photo of, the entire project as a whole and being able to utilize that and to show people this is what we did. But it absolutely changed and adapted, as kind of the, we realized the capacity for this kind of work. And, so we started, doing a little bit with the DSMs, and now we're getting to the point to where we can start pinning those down to actual points on the ground. And it's this process gets better and better the longer that we work with it. And I'd be worried about standardizing anything and getting stuck in this rut of this is the way that it is, and this is the way that it works, and so this is the way that we're going to do it, versus trying to find out better ways all the time, trying to refine the processes and make them better in a continuous sort of loop. So, I mean, one of the things that we started doing with the drone flights, at least on some of these projects, was just picking some landmark points, in a Google Earth, overview. And then after that, we went down to actually surveying those points in order to get more accuracy out of them. And then we started adding more points into that. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, in that case, I'm talking about specifically RGB imagery. But if you're talking about, well, we want to measure something like temperature, we want to measure, something like water velocity. You can't really do that with individual stills. You have to have video. So making sure that you have the right data to fit what your goal is a very big part of answering this question, I think, and also trying not to restrict ourselves too much in terms of, this is the way that we've done it in the past, so this is the way that we're going to do it, but always be looking for the better solution down the road.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think we can close the book on standardization for now. Do any of the other organizing committee members want to throw out an example of remote sensing forum topics that we should consider in the future?
Hi. One thing that I would be interested in hearing from others, because we are really trying to address some climatic issues, particularly in the Chehalis Basin, where we have some funding to do some work monitoring projects that are intended to lower stream temperatures. And so one thing, this is for me personally and our team, but perhaps others are interested in learning more about thermal cameras and multispectral cameras and that topic, since that is going to be new to me and I could use the help.
Yeah, and I'll just say with that, it'd be great if we could all afford hyperspectral cameras, because that would give us all of the information that we need, but they're so expensive that yeah, a lot of times we resort to multispectral to try to do these coarser level classifications. And I totally agree with Connor's comment about FLIR cameras, but I don't know if I have a lack of understanding, or if the technology really just isn't there yet about the resolution and accuracy of what the cameras are actually providing, especially for unmixed stream systems. Connor, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I thought that I might actually put this out there. I do have a white paper related to the actual acquisition of FLIR data and how it can be leveraged for temperature monitoring, but it's extremely technical. I don't know if it would. I mean, I can send it off to you. I could send it to anyone who wants to take a look at it. But from what I understand, it is, at this point, as far as drones are concerned, it's a problem of the technology is not to the point to where you can shrink it down small enough to get it onto an aircraft and have it be accurate enough to actually provide a great amount of accuracy for what it is that you're trying to do. With the larger, I want to say that they're so there's cooled and uncooled sensors essentially, and the larger sensors are internally cooled, which means they have a constant operating temperature inside of the actual device itself. And when but they're big because they're internally cooled. So the only kind of aircraft that you can actually get them on is actual fixed wing, mostly manned aircraft, which is why for the QSI, or not QSI, for the flights that we've had in FLIR prior, where they've actually rectified a lot of this with some ground truthing methods, it's been more accurate, but it's also a lot more expensive to fly that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with it right now. I'm waiting for, like I said, I'm waiting for some sort of big breakthrough in the technology to make it so where we can have a cooled sensor that's small enough to affix to a drone, to a small aircraft, and have a certain measure of accuracy to it. Right now, I mean, I think they're sitting mostly in the range of plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius, which is a little bit too far. And there's ways to kind of push that limit and get them down within, a couple of degrees Celsius. But even that, with the ground truthing methods, can be kind of overwhelming. And there's a lot of extra work that you have to do in order to get it to that level. So that's just. I mean, like I said, if you guys want the white paper that I have on it, you're welcome to it. I could drop it into the Microsoft Teams file location or wherever you want me to put it.
That would be great. Thanks. And thanks for all the comments in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lauren, there's I don't know if you saw, there was a question earlier in the chat from Ann Tim, and she says, I'm crashing this party as a newbie, collaborator of Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. But what is the question we are trying to answer? To me, the monitoring design is always about the question and what is the best sampling design to collect appropriate data at the best spatial / temporal scale to answer that question.
Yeah, and I totally agree. You're kind of bringing it back into perspective for us, Anne. And I think that we, without knowing or without having reviewed all of the expertise of everyone on the call, I'm assuming that it's likely very varied. My perspective or my intents, my goals for our monitoring at CritFic are going to be slightly different than the monitoring goals that Richie and the folks at Biomark in Idaho are doing. So I think it's finding these linkages, the people that are interested in these similar topics, creating sub-working groups, and really trying to get at how can we work on this together, help support each other in figuring out something that's challenging and new. I also see a comment here about massive data storage needs, transferring, gigabytes of files for collaboration. Right. So I don't have the expertise to be able to understand, I guess, the file structure or the data needs. But I imagine that if we contracted, I mean, not us or the Remote Sensing Forum necessarily, but I can imagine, this is something Richie Carmichael's brought up, I can imagine something like any number of remote sensing data portals that already exist, such as like the NASA data portal to download satellite imagery. I imagine that there could be such a data portal where all of these kind of finer resolution, Pacific Northwest specific or even broader would exist. But it would take some additional funding, some additional expertise. Richie, do you have any, I know you guys have been working with big data. Do you have any advice on Kenneth's comment here?
Yeah, I just threw a little comment in the chat about where I would really love to see that type of storage or collaboration go. Looks like someone else just repeated my comment a little bit. But yeah, we have what's called a NAS device. So it's actually something where we house all of our data at Biomark, but then that's linked to an Amazon S3 bucket, which automatically syncs both ways. So we have, I don't know, roughly 100 terabytes of storage to house all of our imagery data at the moment, but would really love to see more of a user-friendly portal where maybe we could house something like that and then have a GUI type interface, something similar to Open Topography, where you could cruise around and see what data is available. And that also sort of gets at that metadata topic that folks were bringing up. That would provide a really nice place to store information about how the data was collected, front and side overlap, altitude, what type of processing did you do on it, did you house raw images, things like that. So that's something that we're scoping and hoping to work towards at some point for the Columbia and elsewhere.
Awesome, thanks Richie.
Hey, Lauren, would you mind if I dropped a link to our FTP to that white paper that I was mentioning for FLIR into the chat here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, please do. Lauren, do you see that next question from Sean?
Oh, yeah, so Sean Welch just dropped into the chat. Does anyone have experience reclassifying unclassified bathymetric LIDAR returns for identifying large woody debris in streams? And I can maybe even go back to that. Yeah, so Sean's somewhat referencing this figure here, the difficulty in classifying all of that wood that's seen in the photo on the left from the point cloud, or the photo on the right in the point cloud on the left.
This is Richie again. We've had some really good success classifying wood in imagery data sets. One option for this could be, I know since this is a quantum spatial, you should have imagery. We could find the wood in the image and mask it out in the point cloud. That's probably one option. We've never really utilized the point cloud to find the wood, but as long as the topology is correct between the imagery and the point cloud, I'd imagine that you could probably use the imagery to mask the wood in the point cloud. It's a pretty large ongoing issue in LIDAR processing, especially for these weightable streams. Any type of structure, overhanging vegetation causes pretty big issues in the numerical modeling. And Sean, we can talk about this offline too.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, Richie, it's looking at the Asper's classifications on the different point returns for the quantum product. The wood's clearly in the unclassified point classification, but trying to tease that out and reclassify that as actually wood, in the raw lash returns is something we're trying to do with that new bathymetric product. So if anybody has experience on that, or Richie, I'll definitely follow up with you. I mean, the SFM stuff definitely teases out the wood, but we're trying to get a better job of reclassifying those unclassified returns to try to get it out of the last data. So thank you.
This is Richie again. I have I guess a general question, and I know we had brought this up in the initial sort of kickoff meeting amongst the group. I guess I'm curious if there is interest from folks to discuss remote sensing that might, maybe not aerial mounted sensors. I'm talking more like, I don't know, biologging tags or temperature tags or some type of other remote sensing technologies that maybe isn't just imagery or LIDAR based. I know that in the fisheries community, there's been a pretty big push to develop, temperature logging and internal accelerometer tags. So I just don't know if folks in the group have any interest in discussing things outside of LIDAR and imagery and drones. And maybe nobody has interest, which is fine.
Yeah, I don't know, Richie. I mean, I imagine, there would be interest given that we frame this in terms of aquatic ecosystems, and that maybe we just don't have a great representation of individuals on the call right now that could be interested. But I definitely think that's something that we should continue to ask or store as a potential meeting topic for future forum meetings. And
hello, this is Narayan.
Hey Narayan, we hear you.
Hey, I just have a request, maybe this is down the line as a subgroup or subcommittee. But given the way the technology is going, I would like to see either a conversation or a thread, or like I said, a subgroup that focuses on just a multispectral approach to the drone processing, so the post-processing, because I'm just now getting into it, and there's a lot of information there, and I think it would be helpful for not only myself, but other people that are looking for advice and just to see how other people are doing it. I'd really like to see that.
Yeah, Connor, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, saying, we've got when you start getting into all these different layers, it kind of opens up a new door into what you can really do with them in terms of being able to create different formulaic maps. The NDVIs, NDREs, OSAVI, there's so many different formulas. I'm just starting to scratch the surface with some of that stuff now, but it seems like it really has a great potential for helping with things like classification, but also with leveraging other habitat factors, things like plant health and plant density, and trying to determine wood from ground, et cetera. So there's a lot of application there. I feel that's kind of untapped in terms of utilizing multispectral data and analysis. Unfortunately, I am not the expert in that. So if we could get someone who is maybe a little more versed, I would absolutely be interested in gleaning some additional knowledge and information from them for our own selfish purposes.
I'd be happy to, just to add to that, I'd be happy to provide data. We've been flying in Altum for 2.5 years now, and I've worked with MicaSense and with Agisoft, the Metashape folks, to try and kind of pin down that multispectral processing and calibration. But I would really benefit too from a multispectral session, and I'd be happy to provide data to folks if people wanted to. Maybe that's a topic for a workshop or something, but we've had some really good results improving classification with the multispectral sensor. So yeah, I'd be happy to be involved in that as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. We've already come up with at least one first workshop that we can host. And I think Richie, thanks for the offer on sharing some example data. That could be something that we get together, one of these sub-working groups for image classification using multispectral imagery, upload that data to what is it called? One of these open source, it's lost in my mind somewhere. Upload the data, collaboratively work on that together, refine the process, and then host a workshop. Well, Amy, did you want to show the webpage?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Yeah, since we have a few minutes here at the end, well, let me share my screen. First, I thought I would share the results from the second Menti question that I asked and never showed anybody the results to. I got a little excited, I think, and completely forgot about it. So we had asked you what your understanding of the topic was, and so it looks like we've got, not too many people completely green over there on the left with me, but seems like we've got a fair number of people kind of solidly in the middle, and we've got a handful of experts with us, so that's great. That's kind of, more or less what we were expecting. And then as far as the website goes, so this is the homepage for PNAMP. So if you go to pnamp.org, you land here. If you go to the navigation bar and hover over projects, you'll get a drop-down list, and you can select a Remote Sensing Forum. That'll take you to our project page. And you can see we've got stuff like goals on there, who should participate. We've got the list of the organizing committee, and we're going to update that with a sentence or two about their expertise. And then if you're ever wondering about meetings and you're struggling to find some email you saw in the past, you can always come here to the Remote Sensing project page, and down at the bottom you'll see related events. Right now there's only one related event, but as we continue to host these, you'll see them line up chronologically, newest to oldest, and so you can always figure out when the next meeting is going to be by going here. And then you can also see that we've got that link to join the listserv. So you'll get one more email from me after this meeting. I'll share the link to the recording. There'll be, I'll probably put this link to join the listserv there, but after that, in order to get future communications about the Remote Sensing Forum, you're going to have to join that listserv. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. And I think that was really all I was going to say about this. Right now, this is taking you to the YouTube channel. Eventually, there'll be a specific view list. What is that called? Playlist for the Remote Sensing Forum, and so I'll update that link to be our specific playlist. So yeah, I think that was all I wanted to say. Down here, we've got related documents as well, and these are the documents from the previous Remote Sensing Forum. So but those will get updated as we add things.
All right. Well, thanks, Amy. And I just want to thank everybody that was able to join this first introductory meeting today. It looks like we've already sparked some potential collaboration in the meeting chat. Kenneth and Eric are going to email each other to discuss change detection, which is great. We're already serving one of our goals. And like we said, look for that upcoming save the date of the second remote forum sensing meeting. That's going to happen in late May or early June. And please share if you know colleagues or others in the basin or beyond that would be interested in such a forum. Please share the project page and any other details.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around to the end. Have a great day.